From a high on Sunday night, having thrashed Manchester City to a low on Thursday morning after being eliminated from the Carabao Cup at the semi-final stage without even a whimper. We'll discuss what we can hope to see on the other side of the Dubai trip, the latest on Arsenal's sporting director position, and what now needs to be a mega summer as far as transfers are concerned. You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, Harry Symeou. Hey, everybody. How are we? Welcome back to the pod. Hope you're all having a wonderful day or evening, depending on when and where you're listening to us from. If you're after a full review of the defeat up at St. James's Park, you can find that on the last episode. It's the last video on the YouTube channel. You can find it in the playlist titled Match Reviews. Or, of course, you can listen to it in your favorite podcast app by just checking out the last episode in the feed. So myself and Mike Stavrou, we sat down bright and early on Thursday morning to dissect what was a really, really disappointing performance and result up at St. James's Park. But we're going to park that for now. If you want that, it's there. Go back and listen to it. As far as I'm concerned, it's done now. I want to focus on the future and I want to focus on what Arsenal can do to try and make the best out of this season and to put our ducks in order ahead of next season as well. And it's not that I'm sitting here going, forget this season, it's a write-off. I absolutely don't feel like that at all. I think it's way too early to be giving up on the Premier League title race. And I know that we've got a long way to go. And I'll tell you what, I'll probably look at it quite differently if, Liverpool go and win at Goodison Park in that game in hand. But I do think that it's quite clear that there needs to be some succession planning done. We talk a lot about the midfield, Jorginho, Partey, probably both going to leave in the summer. If that happens, then you need to, of course, replace them. And that requires some regeneration in the middle of the park. So there's that. Also, it's quite clear that we need a striker. I think we can all agree. Even my biggest critics in the chat box will agree with me on that. But look, succession planning is needed. But as I say, this season is still important and there's still a lot to play for. We're still in the hunt, just about, admittedly, for the Premier League title, but we're also in the UEFA Champions League as well, which I'm desperate to see Arsenal win at some point. There's a few sort of newsy updates that I want to touch on this episode, and I want to discuss why, in my opinion, Jason Ayto, the sporting director, the interim sporting director at Arsenal currently, is under immense pressure. Now, that pressure is not internal pressure. As far as I understand, and as far as is being reported, he's managed to convince people within the football club that he's really, really competent and really, really good. And does that mean he's going to get the job? I couldn't possibly tell you at this moment in time, but it feels like with Jason Ayto, it's kind of heading that way. I want to talk about why I think that, at least in the eyes of the fans, and I don't speak for every fan, of course, I never do. I couldn't possibly do that. But just based on the conversations I've had, have been involved in, on some of the shows that I've been on, listening to people speak about how the January window went for Arsenal, it's impossible to pretend that Jason Ayto isn't coming under some scrutiny. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is on this episode as well. If I could quickly ask you, before we dive into the thick of this content, leave a like on the video if you're watching us on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And if you're a listener rather than a viewer, then please do make sure that you're subscribed on your preferred platform and that you leave us a review. Those reviews are really, really important. They really, really help. A few hellos. We've got Rumble in the chat. We've got Matt joining us from Chicago. We've got more. We've got Adair's with us. Kartik's joining us from Calgary in Canada. We've got Matt. We've got Boston. We've got Rob. We've got DJ Ashby. We've got Chenky. We've got AFC Leo, who says, "Oh, Teta out, get him out." Yeah, there was always going to be a bit of that after the defeat last night. We've got Christoph, we've got Paul, and everybody else in the live chat. Big hello to every single one of you. But let's start by breaking down some of the news pieces that have come our way over the course of Thursday. So, Arsenal have left for Dubai today. They are off to have that warm weather training camp. And there's some good news because both Bukayo Saka and Ben White, according to the reports, have made the trip. So that's obviously really, really positive. I don't know about you guys. I'm desperate to have those two players back. In particular, bukayo Saka, because I think we're really struggling for the outputs from our wide players at the moment. And we know he's got the track record. He's done it time and time again, that bukayo Saka can really help us with that. At right back, I'm desperate for Ben White to return because more than anything else, I think Jurrien Timber needs a rest, guys. The guy has come back from an ACL injury and has been pushed into a position where he's had to play pretty much every game. There's been times where we've used Thomas Partey at right back. That hasn't really worked, in my opinion. And it will be nice to get Ben White back, and we could ease Ben White back in. That's the good thing about Timber's sort of emergence as his replacement, etc., etc. But to me, it's really, really important that we get those two players back, because I think those two players really do bring the best out of Martin Odegaard, who, it's a separate conversation and a separate discussion, but I believe is struggling a little bit at the moment. So getting those two back, I think, would be a big help to him as well. Okay. So Dubai is happening. Saka and White both on the trip. I put in my notes, what can we hope to gain from this trip? Well, if you think that Mikel Arteta's got a magic wand and that when everybody arrives in Dubai, he's going to gather them all around the swimming pool, wave it a couple of times, read out a spell, and turn them all into Rolls-Royce footballers, recharge them all to the brim, get them all going and ready again, and that means we're going to go on some incredible run of form, you are hopeful and a very, very optimistic person. I just can't see that happening, because I think there are other issues this season. There are issues outside of just the burnout that have got us to the place that we're in now. Is it burnout? Partly, maybe. Is players going down with injuries as often as they are a consequence of us overworking certain individuals? You could argue that there is a correlation, of course, between those two things. But I think tactically there have been some issues. I think some of the personnel on an individual level haven't delivered what's required of them. I talk a lot about the front line. I don't think that the front line, and I exclude Kai Havertz from this because he's got a decent goal return. That's not to say he hasn't missed chances before people start. But you look at what Trossard's produced this season, what Martinelli's produced this season, it's just not good enough, really. What Odegaard's produced this season, what Rice has produced this season in terms of impact in the final third, goals and assists, there's not been anywhere near enough of it. Okay, so the problems that have led to Arsenal getting to a position where we're second in the table, okay, it's not done and there's a long way to go, but it feels unlikely at this stage that we're going to catch Liverpool. And then you look at our position in the Champions League, which is very strong, fair play to us. But the fact that we've crashed out of both domestic cups the way we have is a massive disappointment. So getting to this position where come the beginning of February, the majority of us are feeling a little bit underwhelmed by the campaign so far, you have to try and identify what exactly has gone wrong. And I think there are a few things. I've talked about the tactics. I've talked about burnout. I've talked about injuries, etc., etc. What can we hope to gain from this trip was the question that I was originally going to answer. And the answer to that is the opportunity to recharge. I don't think it has to be that deep. Like, I don't think in the space of the 3, 4, maybe 5 days that we're going to spend in Dubai, Mikel Arteta is going to reinvent Arsenal tactically. Could he work on some tweaks? Could he work on a couple of subtle changes that might make a difference, that might catch our opponents off guard, given that everybody seems to be so well versed and well drilled when they come up against us now? That's something that we could do, and I hope that we do, and I hope that we find a way to just refresh things a little bit. But for me, it's about refreshing the players first and foremost. There are a lot of them that have played way too much football. There are a lot of them that have been overly relied upon, and there are a lot of them that I think are running on empty. And it's just impossible for them at this moment in time to keep up that level of performance every sort of 3 days. And the counter argument to what I've been saying recently will be, well, if we had improved the squad in the way that we needed to in January, some of these players could be afforded a rest, a break, a breather, and an opportunity to recharge without us having to rely on the fact that we're out of the FA Cup, therefore creating a gap in our schedule and allowing us to go off to Dubai. Like, that is something that's fallen our way in terms of if you're trying to find a positive from our FA Cup exit. And it allows us to go and do this. And we know that the families are going, and we know that there's going to be a lot of sort of team bonding, etc., going on over in Dubai, which could only be a good thing. Like, I'm not making excuses. Every time I sort of apply a bit of context to anything, people in the chat start making excuses. I'm not making excuses. I think the family time thing is really important as well, though, because when you're playing every 3 days and you're traveling a lot, you probably don't get a lot of that. And I do think they are human beings. In fact, I know they're human beings. And I do think that probably takes its toll over a while, especially when you've got really young kids, as a lot of them do. So, yeah, I'm hoping that what we can gain from the trip is just an opportunity to go away, clear our minds, go away, recover in terms of the players' bodies and fitness. Warm weather is a massive help in that, which is ultimately why they're going. So, yeah, I think all of that's really, really important. But in terms of reinventing the wheel tactically, that's not going to happen. A few slight tweaks and adjustments, I expect to see those. And I hope that we can find the right ones, identify the right tweaks and adjustments to put us in a really strong position for what remains of the campaign. But this is what you can expect to gain from the trip. Like, what happened last year was amazing, but there was obviously a lot of weight put on at that trip, and there was a lot of what we done in the second half of the season attributed to that. And I think, it did help in some ways, and we tend to go on these trips when we're struggling, but it isn't like, the be all and end all. Like, it wasn't the sole reason. So if we can get some rest and recharge and re-energize on this trip, and allow people to clear their heads and just step out of the spotlight for a little bit, then that will be the trip doing its bit. And hopefully we see the rewards for that on the pitch. There has been some interesting reporting today from Sami Mokbel of the Mail. I know people probably don't want to hear about the summer now, given the frustrations that the January window brought. But he has spoken quite a bit about the summer and what it holds. He says there's a sense at Arsenal that they're gearing up for an unprecedented summer. What does that mean? Mega spend? Is that what we're expecting? Are Arsenal going to go out and really throw the kitchen sink at it and try to get this team to a level where they can go on and win the game's biggest honors? You hope that's the case. But I just think, and I don't know if Sami Mokbel's been briefed with this stuff or if he's getting it from other sources, because I don't know how he works, right? But I do find it a little bit tone deaf and a little bit annoying that whenever we sort of have a poor window, which is what we've just had, because even the manager was sitting in front of the sort of cameras at press conferences and saying we're short and we need something. So when you fail to do that, I know people say, myself included, that you don't just sign players for the sake of it, and all of that is true and all of that is valid. But at the same time, by that same token, let's not pretend that the window wasn't a failure, because part of being successful in a window is identifying the right players. So it's 50% identifying the players and it's 50% getting the deal done. That's how I view it. Okay. So if you've identified the players, but you couldn't get the deal done, then that's a failure on the getting the deal done side. And if you could get the deal done because you had the financial means and the willingness to do it, but you couldn't identify the players, then that's a failure on the identification side. Whatever way you package the January transfer window up, it isn't a success. And fine, that's not always in your own hands as a football club. There are other factors. Do the players that you identify want to come? Are the clubs that they play for willing to sell them at this stage in the campaign? All of that comes into it. I'm not thick enough or naive enough to think that it's only on the club. There are outside factors that come into this. There are agents. There are all sorts of different parties involved nowadays, which make these deals incredibly difficult. But at the same time, we have gone into the business end of the season now without addressing some real areas of concern. And to add insult to the injury, we've lost Gabriel Martinelli as well to what looked like a hamstring problem. We don't know how long he's going to be out for. We don't understand fully the extent of that injury at this moment in time. But, when you factor that into the equation as well, it makes the window look even worse. It makes the window look even worse. So I find it, and but let me be clear, I'm not at all having a go at Sami Mokbel here, right? He's doing his job. He's reporting the information he has. and good luck to him. He's been great recently, and I say recently, I don't know about what he was doing previously, but in terms of his Arsenal coverage recently, he's been really good, and I've really enjoyed it. And I think it's quite cool to see like another emerging voice. Like there was a time, wasn't there, as Arsenal fans, where there were like one or two journalists that we would look to for everything, and it's obviously come to light now that there are others with pretty good sources as well. Sammy Mockbell being one of them. But my point about it being tone deaf is that it's only an if, because I don't know where it's come from, but this idea, okay, that we can mask over what was a failure of a window by getting everybody excited for the summer. No. Come the end of the season, we can start looking at the summer. Should the club internally be looking at the summer already? Absolutely. Because for them, it's imperative that they have their ducks in order, an idea of what they want to do come the summer, so that when it comes, they can execute properly. Okay? Fine. But as fans, and I don't speak for all of you, I speak for myself, but my view on the summer right now is I don't care about the summer. That's for the people that get paid the money to figure out who should come in and who should leave, etc. That's for them to worry about the summer. For us right now, it's about the here and now. And we had an opportunity to go out and improve the team for the here and now, and we didn't do it. And we didn't do it because our reasoning and justification was we didn't find the right player. Well, then that's a failure on the identification point, because there's no way that there isn't a player out there that could improve this Arsenal squad in an attacking sense. This team has been pretty toothless going forward. Not every single week, because we've seen really good examples of what can happen when it clicks. We saw one at the weekend against Manchester City. But there have been so many games, guys, this season where all the things that myself and Mike were speaking about when it comes to the Newcastle game were on display. What we saw against Newcastle, struggling to create chances, having nearly 70% of the possession, but only 3 attempts on target in the entire game. We've probably had that conversation 10, 15 times over this season. And so there comes a point where it's not washing with me anymore. So I know people are annoyed about the January window, and I know that there's a feeling probably that actually if you can get people excited for the summer, they'll maybe back off a little bit and just display a bit of patience. No, no, we don't want to hear about the summer now, because all it's doing is riling people up and making people feel as though, the club didn't do its best to recruit now. And as if the club have sort of written off the season a little bit. And I'm not saying that's the case, but when you send that type of message, when that is suggested by your actions or inaction in this case, you end up in a situation where the fans start to feel like that. And you're going to get some crap atmospheres at the Emirates Stadium when some of the season ticket holders, particularly towards the end of the season, if we're out of the title race, are going to stop turning up. And they're going to start putting their tickets on the exchange. And then the club are going to be scrambling around to sell them. And you're going to get people who are going to come there and come there as tourists. And when I say tourists, I don't mean people from abroad, by the way, that follow Arsenal Football Club. There's a lot of really dedicated fans that follow the club from abroad. I see it in my chat box every day. What I mean by tourists are people that don't really have any skin in the game, that don't really care much for what the outcome is. They're just turning up for the Premier League experience. When you end up with a stadium full of those people, your atmosphere is impacted. It really, really is. So this talk about an unprecedented summer, which I'm assuming means that we're going to go and spend a lot of money, save it, guys. Like, because you're sending the message, you're making the point, whether you want to or mean to or not, but you're suggesting at least that actually this season is not the priority, and that shouldn't be the case. Not at this stage. If you get to the last month and you're out of everything, fine, right? Fine. But not at this stage. There was talk in Sammy Mockbell's piece about Zubimendi. He says he looks certain to arrive from Sociedad as the club prepare for the expected departures of Jorginho and Partey. I think that those two are going to leave, so it's right that we are succession planning there. And I've talked about Zubimendi in the past because it's not the first time we've been linked with him. I've said that, there are things about Zubimendi that I really like. I like his ability to dictate the tempo of a game. I like what he brings in possession. Not sure I'm totally convinced by what Martin Zubimendi brings out of possession. And that's largely an opinion I have based on the lack of physical power. And I think in the Premier League, more than any other league in the world, that is a big factor. And I worry that he might not have what it takes to do that necessarily, to do that role himself at the six, unless he's got someone sitting alongside him, which might lead to a change in formation. Does it mean to a change in Declan Rice's role? I don't know. I'm still a little bit unsure about that one. But it seems like, according to Sammy Mokbel, Arsenal making progress with that. He also goes on to say that they will explore a move for a versatile attacker with Williams and Cunha among those admired, but the big money will be spent on a centre forward. Well, Nico Williams had a release clause. He's got a release clause. If you really wanted to do it, you could have done it. I know that his wages are crazy. And it comes down to that kind of discussion, doesn't it, around how far you're willing to push to do certain deals. But like, Nico Williams has a release clause. You don't need to wait until a specific time to trigger that release clause. Whether you can do the deal beyond that is another debate and discussion, but show your intent. If you really want him, go and get it. Matthias Cunha, he's just signed a new contract at Wolves with a £62 million release clause, as I understand it. He's among those admired. Could have got him as well if we really, really wanted to. But we obviously didn't feel that those players were worth that kind of money. So then what makes you think that those players are going to be worth that kind of money come the summer? And this is my point. Like, I'm getting frustrated with reports of what we're going to do in the summer or what future plans look like. We had an opportunity in the January window, in the thick of what's been a really challenging season for a lot of reasons, some of our own making, some of which were out of our control. But we had an opportunity to improve the side, even just a little bit, even 5-6% by bringing in another striker. And I was listening to the Arscast earlier when I was on my way to work, and Andrew made a great point, as he often does. He said, if we had another striker option last night at St. James's Park, when we went 2-0 down on the night and then 4-0 down on aggregate, which was quite early on in the second half, we could have taken Kai Havertz off and brought on this other striker. And it doesn't matter if that striker was an upgrade or not. We just could have brought another striker on to take away from Kai Havertz's load, to not have him play 90 minutes again, going through the motions. That's the value of having another striker, aside from being able to start one over the other. And this is the point that I've been making for ages. And there was a comment that I heard, I read in the live chat box. Was it in the live chat box, or was it in the just general comments? Let me just find it 1 second, because I do want to address this point. It was made by a listener. Here he goes. It's Crafty. He said, I love the Chronicles of Aguna and the work that Harry does, but this Havertz rhetoric needs to stop. I like Havertz and the work he does, but he misses too many chances and does not score enough goals to be our number 9. He misses far too many sitters, which at the highest level is unexpectable. You've got to call a spade a spade. He's not clinical enough. That's not scapegoating him, but he has a certain level of responsibility. Yeah, look, I'm not shying away from that. And I don't think I've ever shied away from the fact that A, Kai Havertz is not an out-and-out striker, and B, he's not going to score you as many goals as the very elite centre-forwards do. I've never shied away from that point, ever. My point has always been, if you have an issue with the way that Arsenal attack and the lack of efficiency in the penalty area, you need to zoom out and look at the problem we have as a collective. You can focus in on Kai Havertz, and, he does miss chances, and there have been some big chances at some key moments that have really left people frustrated. None more than the chance that he missed in the first leg of our Carabao Cup semi-final when it was 2-0. Making it 2-1 at that point could have completely swung the pendulum in the tie the other way. So, of course, I feel that frustration. And, of course, I understand why people get irritated when he misses those chances. But he is like a percentage of the problem. But what about Trossard not scoring anywhere near enough goals? What about Martinelli not scoring anywhere near enough goals? What about Martin Odegaard's contributions having gone completely off the side of a cliff? What about Declan Rice, who got 7 or 8 this season and has barely scored this season? Do you see what I mean? This is where I just want a little bit more balance in the analysis. Like, I want us to identify the actual problem, which is a much bigger and wider one. If you make one player a scapegoat and then you get him out, you might still have the same problem if you fail to address what the actual issue is. And our attack as a collective is not potent enough. That is fact. And even more so when you take out bukayo Saka, who's one of our most impactful. It's understandable that we're in this position, but as I keep bleating on about, we had a chance to put that right and we didn't do it. Or at least, if not put it right, because maybe that's the wrong turn of phrase, at least try and bridge the gap between where we are and where we want to be slightly. Get halfway across and then hope that your players pick up form and that they can take you the rest of the way. So in this piece from Sami Mokbel, he also talked about Alexander Isak. He said he's the dream, but given the cost, which is believed to be in excess of £120 million, a successful swoop seems implausible. Arsenal will, however, explore its validity at least. Well, yeah, let's see if we can do a deal, and if we can, pay up, because he's that bloody good. He's a fantastic striker. He's the complete striker. My reservation about him in the past was that he wasn't clinical enough, and he's proven me wrong there. But also around injuries. And at the moment, Alexander Isak looks pretty fit and healthy. So, yeah, I think he's the one. I think he's the one that, if it can be done, you go all out for, you go for broke. And if Arsenal, for example, so I'm being quite critical here today, okay? I am being very negative, if you like, about what we didn't do in the January window and the impact that that's had. And I've also said that I sometimes feel like this, we couldn't find the right player thing. It's just an easy thing to throw out there to kind of keep the Wolves away. If Arsenal go for broke in the summer and sign Alexander Isak, or make a real effort to get him, table 120 million quid, whatever it's going to take. If Arsenal go and do that in the summer, I will promise you that I will hold my hands up and I will say, we were wrong to get onto their backs for not bringing in any striker in January. Because if this is what they had up their sleeve and they needed to keep their powder dry in order to achieve that, they were right and I was wrong. I'll be the first person to put my hands up and say that. But that kind of thing now, whether it be Isak or Sesko, whatever, it has to happen now. And that brings me on nicely to the point in the title about Jason Ayto. Sami Mokbel said that if you speak to those whose opinions matter, they'll tell you Ayto's considered approach has impressed and is one that's aligned with the club's long-term strategy. Ayto is understood to have improved his standing among those behind the scenes since his interim appointment. So he's doing all the right things in terms of the club's hierarchy and the way that they look down on him. But we will never know how much of their judgment is based on what the business results look like versus what the on-the-pitch results look like. And is there some, what's the word? Is there some connection between the two? Of course, the better you do business-wise, the more money you can spend on players. The more money you can spend on players, the more chance you have of being competitive. Recent history in football proves us that. Okay, so that's all good. But this thing of like, he's impressed everyone, and it kind of suggests, it feels like they're putting out the sort of the feeling around him in anticipation of him being announced as a sporting director. And listen, I don't even have a massive problem with Jason Ayto getting the job, because the truth is I know nothing about the guy. It's impossible for me to sit here and tell you how qualified or unqualified he is to do the job, because I don't know anywhere near enough about him. I accept that. I acknowledge that. But what I will say, guys, is this. Jason Ayto, if he does take on the sporting director role, and Mikel Arteta said, didn't he, in his press conference pre-Newcastle, that he expects a decision to be made around that position sooner rather than later. If Jason Ayto takes on that role, he starts that role under immense pressure. he's under immense pressure from the get-go, because it isn't just the one window from which the fans feel a little bit shortchanged. This goes back to last summer. A lot of Arsenal fans told us, and I admit that at the time I was a bit like, oh, hold on a minute, let's see how this goes, guys. Let's not jump to too many conclusions. Let's see how it goes. But the summer window, looking at it now with the benefit of 6 months or so of hindsight, was a poor one. Calafiori's come in. I really like him, but he's not played anywhere near enough football through injuries, which should have been a red flag when we went in to sign him, because it's been a problem throughout his career. Mikel Merino hasn't impressed me one bit. So that feels like it probably shouldn't have been one of the priorities. We signed David Raya on a permanent deal, which I think was the right decision. He had a howler against Newcastle, played a really silly pass into Declan Rice in that semi-final second leg. But outside of that, and listen, people have their moments. Outside of that, he's been outstanding. But, you look at the need for a striker. It's been there for a while. It's existed for a while. And the more windows that pass without Arsenal being decisive, saying this is our man and going out and getting him, the more people are going to start to question the running of the club. The more people are going to start to question the intentions of those at the top of the club. Is it, we'll invest, and we have invested up to the point where we can reestablish Arsenal as a Champions League force, increase those revenues, make the business look a lot healthier. But then the next step is not necessarily to try and smash through that ceiling and get us to the point where we're winning everything, but actually it's about maintaining that Champions League status so that we can maintain those revenue streams. If it's more than that, which is ambition, if it's about going and winning, then you need to take that next step. And I've used this analogy before, right? If you start building a house with a budget in mind and you get it to 85% done, okay, and you've run out of money, or you've spent more than you expected to spend, what do? Do you leave it 85% done? No, you bloody don't. You don't leave it without windows. You don't leave it without flooring or the essentials. You find a way to try and make it happen. And life is like that, right? You budget for stuff, you end up going over. Then you have to find alternative ways of financing it, alternative ways of stretching to make that happen, because that's ultimately your goal and what you want. And you're going to do everything within your power to get there. If our goal really, really is to go and win trophies, we have to take that next step. And that next step starts in the transfer market. I'm not one of these people who says that transfers are the be all and end all. I'm not that guy that stands outside the ground saying, spend some effing money. That's not me. It's never been me and it never will be me. But we are clearly short in attack, and we have not addressed that in the window that's just gone by. Okay, it's done now. Draw a line under it. There's no point in complaining about it every week. We're still in the immediate aftermath of the window, so I feel like I'm still entitled to moan about it. But moving forward, I will stop talking about the transfer window. But if you think that when we fall short, those windows, the one that's just gone and the summer one previously, are not going to be brought up, and are not going to be, especially the January one, are not going to be attributed to Jason Ayto, then you're living in fantasy land. He is going to be under immense pressure and immense scrutiny when the transfer window next opens. So come the summer, if you're going to feed us with stories about, and I don't know where they come from, but if you're going to feed us with stories about Zubimendi, about Sesko, about Isak, you better go out and do those deals. Not because of people like me, but because of those toxic voices that are out there that are going to jump on that and are going to be able to say, I told you this guy doesn't know what he's doing. I told you this club doesn't care about winning. I told you that this club doesn't have any ambition. And the more times that happens, the more people jump on board with that kind of narrative, the more toxic the fan base generally becomes, the more crap the atmosphere inside Emirates Stadium becomes, the bigger every single meltdown every time we lose a game of football. Do not feed that. Do not feed that. Like, the club, in my opinion, dropped the ball by not going and adding that attacker in this window. But if they go and get an Isak, for instance, or a Sesko, who they're obviously interested in genuinely, then I can maybe sit back and say, okay, it's frustrating that we didn't get the player that we wanted in January, but you knew who your target was. It was well documented. And what we've seen you do is hold your nerve and make sure that you get the player that you want first and foremost, rather than scrambling around in desperation and just taking any Tom, Dick, or Harry. So that, we're only going to know whether they've done that for the right reasons come the summer, which is why I'm not going to go as OTT as some others. But there's concern out there right now. There's a lot of concern out there. And when you, a day after the window shuts, 2 days after the window shuts, go up to St. James's Park, create nothing, lose another attacker to injury, you're going to get asked these questions. And let's hope that off the back of the Dubai trip, Arsenal can turn it around and Arsenal can get back on track and at least make a fight of the Premier League title race and give it a good old crack in the Champions League. Because if they don't, it will show a regression, and a regression at this stage in the process or project is not really going to go down that well, is it? And it's not really acceptable. We're almost there. We are. There's so many great things about this Arsenal side. We spend a lot of time focusing and talking about the negatives, but there are a lot of positives as well. But you need to finish the job. And finishing the job, for me, means going out and getting those final pieces of the jigsaw. And right now, we just don't have them. We just don't have them. So, yeah, that's kind of my little 2 pence on all the stuff that's come out today. I think Jason Ayto's under pressure externally, clearly not internally based on these reports. It seems like he's impressed. Obviously, they know him better than we do. Obviously, they know what the club's exact sort of aims are and objectives are. And if they can see that he's playing into that and helping them to achieve that, they're going to be chuffed, aren't they? We look at it through a slightly different lens as supporters, and I'm well aware that we don't know everything. So I never claim that we do. But if we have another disappointing window in the summer, or all these stories do not come to fruition, then you're going to get the outrage. Then you're going to get the sort of pushback from the fans. And that is going to cause a negative atmosphere around the football club. And we've done so well over the last 2 years to eradicate that. People that were looking for any excuse to hammer the Arsenal just couldn't, because the improvement was clear to see. But it's not, we got to the point where improvement is nice, but you need to get over the line. And to get over the line, we need to take another step, I believe, in the transfer market. And we haven't done that. And the fact that we haven't done that is going to draw criticism from the wider Arsenal fan base. Rightly so, in my opinion. If they go and address these needs in the summer with big money signings that we simply couldn't have done had we gone and got your Cunhas or your whoever's in this window, then I will look back with the benefit of hindsight and say I was wrong and they were right. But for now, people are going to ask these questions. While the team is struggling on the pitch, people are going to ask these questions. And when I say struggling on the pitch, I mean in certain aspects of the game, not generally. Generally, we're doing really well. We're second in the Premier League. We went through in the Champions League comfortably. But, just in terms of some isolated issues that we have that clearly need addressing, if we don't do that, people are going to get frustrated and it's going to spill over. And we just don't want that. After doing so much work to turn around the atmosphere around Arsenal, to let it slip back into that would be really frustrating. But hey, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all so much for joining me. Really, really appreciate you joining us at this hour of the day. If I could ask you, if you're watching us on YouTube, please do leave a like on the video, guys. It really, really, really does help. And subscribe to the channel if you're new as well. All of that great stuff is really, really important. If you're listening on audio, please do leave us a review. And you can check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/the Chronicles of a Gooner. If you want to help me to make more content and spend more time on this as a freelance broadcaster, the Patreon thing really does give me a really much needed boost. So if you're interested, get over there, give us a sign up, support, follow, etc. You'll also get access to our match day reaction pieces after each and every single Arsenal game as well. Right, I'll see you all later. Until the next one, have a good one. And until the next one, have a good one. I didn't really think that through. Have a good day, good evening, depending on when you're watching or listening to this back. And I'll see you all soon. Until then, take care.